Good evening. I'm Steve Kroft, and welcome to 60 Minutes Presents. For nearly 3 decades, the name Gotti has been synonymous with organized crime in America. According to the federal government, John Gotti Sr. and later his son, John Jr., ran the Gambino crime family, the largest, most influential mafia family in the country. Gotti Sr., who died in prison 9 years ago, was a ruthless gangster who craved celebrity. The son, if you're to believe his story, wanted out. And John Gotti Jr. wants people to believe his story. After the federal government put him on trial 4 times in 5 years without getting a conviction, he agreed to sit down with us and talk about his family saga in his first extended television interview. He wanted to be the only person we talked to on camera for this story and to have his lawyer by his side to make sure he didn't say anything that could be used to indict him again, because no one is likely to be watching this story more closely than the FBI.
The story will continue in a moment.
My father was my cause. If my father wasn't in that life, I probably wouldn't have been in the street life either. Whatever he was is what I wanted to be. And if he decided the next day, you know what, I don't like this anymore, I'm going to be a butcher, I would tell him, I hope you have a smock for me. That's the way I feel. That's the way I felt.
You can tell he still worships his father.
Handsome as ever. Handsome as ever.
Not just with the love of a son, but with some of the same misguided romanticism that has long drawn the news media and the public to the mob culture. And John Gotti Sr. was the most famous mobster of his generation. He ascended to the top of the Gambino crime family by organizing the assassination of his predecessor, Paul Castellano, outside a popular Manhattan steakhouse. It was a stylistic statement that Gotti Sr. would accentuate with $2,000 Italian suits and hand-painted ties, earning him a certain brand of celebrity and a nickname, the Dapper Don. In New York, a city that worships power of any kind, Gotti's reached beyond gambling and loan sharking into the garment center, the garbage business, and the construction industry. And he wanted everyone to know what he did, as long as they couldn't prove it.
Now, a friend of your father's told me there's nothing he loved better than being a gangster.
Nothing. Nothing.
What did he love about it?
Everything. There was nothing he didn't like about it. My father lived that life 24/7. 24/7. In fact, his wife and kids were second to the streets. He loved it. He loved the code. He loved the action. He loved the chase. My father had to be out there in the city. No other city can do for John but New York City, because it never slept. There was always action. He could always find action.
Was that more important than money?
He hated money. He used to say, if a guy was saving money or putting money away, and he was a street guy, he would say, what's on his mind? What's he got planned? You know, at the end of the day, we're all going to jail. What's he going to do with that money?
Is that the way he looked at life?
He felt that anybody who really truly lived in the streets, not the fringe players, not the frauds, not the pretenders, if you really truly lived it like John did, at the end of the day, you got to die or go to jail. That's the rules. That's the way it was.
It was part of the gangster ethos that permeated the working-class Italian neighborhoods of New York 50 years ago, where John Jr. grew up with his brothers Frank and Peter and sisters Victoria and Angel. His father was absent for most of their childhood, serving a stretch at Lewisburg Penitentiary for cargo hijacking. Junior was told his dad was off on business, but all the kids teased him that he didn't really have a father, until one day in 1972, when his father came home from prison.
Almost on cue, this brown Lincoln Continental Mark IV with smoked windows at the time when nobody had smoked windows comes rolling down the street. And it stops right by me. And the window rolls down. And I turn and I says, there's my father. Everybody was in shock. He goes, where's the house? Because he didn't know where we lived. So I says, the second house off the corner of the green awning, Dad. I'll see you over there. And he pulls away. He's got a chocolate brown suit on with a chocolate brown overcoat and a cream-colored mock neck. And he looks the part. And he's beautiful. He looks beautiful. And everybody came out on the block to see him. And he turns down the block and gives like a regal wave, you know. Gives one of those waves, and he goes in like he owned the place. Like he always belonged there, like it was always his. In fact, all the women on the block began putting notes in his windshield.
What kind of notes?
I mean, he didn't share them with me. I would guess. I know my mother would often fight with my father. You know, you're giving off the wrong signals. And he would say, what do you want me to do? Walk in with a potato sack over my head? It's not my problem that the women on this block are falling in love with me.
Did he talk about what he did for a living?
No, he didn't sit at the table and say, you know, by the way, my take from the numbers rackets are up this week. You know, it didn't go like that. Nothing like that.
And he didn't have conversations like that with some of his friends?
No, other than my father being away from home, you know, being incarcerated and the hours that he kept. Our house was a pretty normal house.
Gotti says it wasn't until he was 14, when he was shipped off to boarding school at the New York Military Academy, that he found out exactly who his father was and what he did. And he learned it while watching a news program with his fellow cadets.
And I remember it was 1979, and we're watching a show, and they're saying, this man's a captain, and the Gambino family, and this, that, and the other thing, and they're talking about him, and I'm mortified. And I'm in the back row, and I'm watching this, and I'm not saying nothing. And they say, John Gotti, and they're talking. So now, suddenly, the other cadets start turning to look at me. See, he's got the same name as you. Yeah, he certainly does. So another kid says, hey, wait a minute. That guy was here last week. And at that point, it's there. You know, there. Now it's all on the table, you know.
What was the reaction of your classmates?
I guess maybe some of them were intimidated, but most of them thought it was pretty cool. Does your father kill people? Does your father beat people up? Not around the house.
At some point, you must have come to the realization that he did outside of the house.
Probably. I don't know. In front of me? No.
How do you, as a young man, react to that?
From Howard Beach. I'm from Howard Beach. Pretty much we're taught from a young age that you don't call the cops for nothing. We take care of our own problems. And pretty much all your uncles, cousins, friends, father, they're all bouncing around the street in one shape or form, and this is the way it is. As 14-year-old kids, 15-year-old kids, we'd go up to the boulevard where we hung out, and we'd talk about, hey, tough break, you know, Tony just got 10 years, he's going to jail, having a big party from over there. Oh, yeah, good, good, good. And his sons were sitting next to you. It was normal conversation for us.
Mm-hmm. You knew people were breaking the law.
Sure, sure.
And what you're saying is that wasn't considered necessarily a bad thing.
No, no, not at all.
Because?
Because everybody did it. You know what? The guy next to you was a car thief. The guy next to you on your left-hand side, he was a bookmaker. That's everybody.
It was the summer after he graduated from military school that Gotti discovered what he thought was his calling, hanging around his father's headquarters at the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club.
I'd go to the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club all the time. I wanted to be around him. And he had that type of a personality. And I would just watch. He's sitting around a social club, and they'd be playing cards, and they're hanging out, and they're breaking balls, and cooking, and laughing, and commiserating, and everything is going on. And you're right there. And you're saying, this is where I belong.
But it wasn't all pinochle and pasta. And as these prison videos show, John Gotti Sr. had a sadistic streak, even when dealing with his 10-year-old grandson, who he thought had showed him disrespect.
You get an ass kicking from me. I ain't your father or mother. I know how to raise children. For me,
he's being smart out.
No, for me, you get an ass kicking.
Believe me, he'll get an ass
kicking. You never want to. You'll never forget the ass kicking you get from me.
This one shows Gotti telling his daughter how he would have dealt with an incident involving a neighbor.
You should have went there and told him, but listen, do you want me to tell my father? You want him to handle it his way? Do you want to wake up in the morning and don't see your son no more? Is that what you desire? Do you want us to cut his tongue out of his mouth?
And you had the sense he could do it.
He had a temper.
Volcanic.
Was that ever directed at you?
Well, I got in trouble as a kid once or twice. He'd give me a swift kick in the backside or a nice crack. Yeah, sure.
By 1982, John Jr. could dish it out as well as take it. According to law enforcement, he served a 6-year apprenticeship learning the various rackets, shakedowns, illegal gambling, loan sharking, eventually drawing the attention of FBI surveillance cameras. In 1988, with the encouragement and strong endorsement of his father, John Jr. would become a made man in the Gambino crime family.
When you became a made man, when you were formally inducted into La Cosa Nostra, was that a big deal for him?
You like the way that word sounds, La Cosa Nostra, how it flows on your tongue?
No, I'm trying to find another word. You don't like mob, you don't like mafia.
I was a street guy. I was in the streets.
Okay.
And, when my father embraced me and put his arm around me and looked at me as a street guy, as a knock-around guy, a bounce-around guy like himself, proudest moment of my life. It's the proudest moment of my life. It's because I was slowly becoming like him.
When you were finally made, he was happy.
I think he was very happy. I think he was as proud as a father would be if his son just made All-American.
He would soon trade in his T-shirts for suits and graduate from the mob rank of soldier to captain, according to the FBI, in charge of his own crew. The only person unhappy with his new career was his mother.
She didn't talk to my father for a couple of years as a result of that. She looked at it as I left the son in the street. My son Frankie died in my arms at 12 years old. She took it personal.
The death of Junior's younger brother Frank in a traffic accident was considered the most traumatic event in the family's history, and it would have serious consequences for the neighbor who killed him.
What happened exactly?
He was riding a mini bike. Unfortunately, he jetted out into the street, coming off the Belt Parkway, and the car hit him. The car hit him and killed him.
What was the effect on your father?
He didn't show much emotion, but my bedroom, the vent was attached to his den, and I would hear him cry. I would hear him cry.
The person that was driving the car,
right,
disappeared.
Correct.
Do you think that was something your father was involved in?
Probably. Knowing John, and how he was, and how he felt about a lot of things, especially regarding his own children, he probably was. Do I know with certainty? No, I don't know. He'd never discussed that with me. But knowing my father, there's no way you're going to hurt one of his without him hurting you. It's just not going to happen. There's just no way. It's not going to happen.
It would not have been the first or the last time that John Gotti Sr. had someone killed, but it took a long time for someone to prove it. Despite years of video and audio surveillance, the FBI needed the testimony of Gotti's underboss, mob rat Sammy the Bull Gravano, to finally put the Dapper Don away for 5 gangland slayings.
Obviously, he spent a lot of time in prison for murder. How do you justify that?
I don't know if you could ever justify murder. I don't know if you could justify it, but I could make some type of an argument. You want to hear it?
Sure.
Okay. So John was a part of the streets. He swore that was his life. He swore, I'm going to live and die by the rules of the streets, the code of the streets. And everybody that John's accused of killing or may have killed or wanted to kill or tried to kill was a part of that same street. That was a part of the same world, the same code. And my father always said in his mind, you break rules, you end up in a dumpster. If I break rules, meaning himself, they're going to put 2 in my hat and put me in a dumpster. That's the way it works. So, am I justifying it? No, I'm explaining it.
And you were comfortable living in that world?
When you don't know much else, yeah, I guess so. When you don't know much else, I guess so.
You thought you were capable of killing somebody?
I don't think anybody, I don't know if anybody ever thinks of himself as capable of killing anybody until they're put into that position.
I want to ask you, have you ever killed anybody? But you're not going to answer that question, are you?
That's right. First of all, it's a ridiculous question. Second off, if you go by the government, who didn't I kill?
With his father in prison for life, federal investigators turned their attention to Junior, who they say became the acting boss and de facto head of the Gambino family, a title and characterization that Gotti and his lawyer, Charles Carnesi, quibble with.
Well, I was my father's son. I'd be his eyes and ears. I'd handle the lawyers. I'd handle monetary issues to a point.
Would it be incorrect to say that you were the acting head or the head of the Gambino family after your father went to prison?
I don't think that that's a title that John ever accepted. I think that's something that the law enforcement may have been suggesting. I think it may have been, at one point in time, his father's desire for him to succeed him.
I more or less call myself a loyal son. That's my title. That's a title I like.
It's a fine but important linguistic distinction under federal racketeering law. If John Gotti Jr. were to acknowledge that he had responsibility for running a criminal enterprise like La Cosa Nostra, he could be prosecuted for any criminal act committed by that group during his tenure, regardless of whether he was directly involved.
Did you ever talk to him about any of this stuff?
No. My father tried his best to shelter me from certain things.
I mean, that seems kind of hard to believe.
So there was no communication between my father and I regarding that. There was none.
In part because the conversation would have been recorded.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Gotti says all of his business conversations with his father were relayed through emissaries. Whatever you call that loyal son period, which lasted for 7 years, it did not go smoothly. When authorities found $358,000 in the basement of his home, along with a list of recently inducted mafia members, his father was taped calling his son an imbecile, and the New York tabloid press had a field day.
They used to make fun of you, that they used to say that you weren't ready for the job, people weren't happy with you, that you were kind of the dopey Don. Did any of that get to you?
No, not at all. Not at all. First of all, every time the Gottis were in the tabloids or on the front page, the sales would go up about 8%, I believe. That's proven. It was 8 or 10% increase in sales. So
For the paper?
For the paper. So it made good read. Who cares? I mean, I really care. Dopey Don, who cares? Have fun with it. I'm a godfather 19 times. I have 19 godchildren. I was a best man 13 times. So you look at that, I had a lot of responsibility. I was popular to a lot of people.
But over time, Gotti says, he began to have second thoughts about the life he had chosen.
When did you begin to sour on this whole thing?
Before I had my children, I really didn't care if I died in jail. But then once you have children, your perspective completely changes. Now you live your life for them. And I looked at my son, I looked at my daughter, I looked at my other son, all my children, and I would say to myself, wow, if I'm gone, what are they going to do?
By the late 1990s, he learned that the federal government was preparing to file charges against him for racketeering, and he began to wonder whether he had the stomach for the job.
I mean, there was a lot of treachery.
Oh, absolutely. Well, there's treachery in there's treachery in the corporate world. Equally, I have to say, I can't say more so, equally so in the streets.
It's dealt with a little differently on the streets, though.
Careers are made and broken. Guys are bankrupted. Yeah, I see where you're going with this.
Did you ever worry about getting whacked?
Every day. Every day. It's a possibility. It's a possibility that something could happen to you every day of your life. And you know something, when you hang out in the streets, you're hanging with a different type of a person. You don't know what's going to happen. You know, you can be with Tony's here today, then Tony's doing 10 years tomorrow. Billy's here today, and then you never see him again. Who knows? Anything's possible. It's a volatile existence.
When we come back, telling his father he wants to leave the family business and quit the mob.